your name? Don't you play this game? You from another land, got you like it's contraband. Tell me what's your name? Don't you play this game? You from another land, got you like it's contraband.
What's up, guys? Keyshawn Uchiha here, back at you with another new Ultimate Universe video. Now, this is just going to be a one-trick pony. If you want any parts, let's get this up to like 40 likes, alright? But this is going to be a one-trick pony. I'm going to go all the way up to an hour of where I left off, and pretty much that's it. But this is going to be an 18 plus of what if Deku was a new god, or was a god, you could say. Now, how would this happen? What's going on? And what basically is going to go happen? Well, basically, it's going to be a crazy story that I thought of, and let's just see how it's going to go. But basically, how we're going to start this off. We pretty much starts off with me, Keyshawn Uchiha. Now, I'm pretty much in the clouds, pretty much just chilling. And this is where I go to the gods meeting where all the gods are there. Basically, Hercules, well, demigods, other gods, and basically Hercules, other fork-tailed gods, the great laughing Buddha god, Sun Wukong, a lot of gods, you could say. Now, this is where I'm pretty much there, sitting at a seat, basically just bored out my mind. Which, this is where Zeus sits next to me and start having a conversation with me, which I pretty much say, hey Zeus, what's up? Which, pretty much Zeus starts talking to me and we start having a conversation. This is where many of the gods and stuff are pretty much sitting down and we all start having the discussion about humans. Which, this is where I pretty much say, so, what are y'all thinking? Y'all want to get rid of the humans? What we trying? What we trying here? Which, pretty much, this is where one of the gods thinking that maybe they should, like, intervene and put the humans on the right stair path so the earth won't, rot away. Which, this is where I pretty much make a smile and says, well, how about we have an amusement and make one of the humans a god? A new god at that. Which, pretty much, this is where I smile and says, and it will be under my supervision. So, if anything happens to the earth or the earth get blown up, I can just repair it and all that stuff. Anyways, I am the galaxy god, by the way, which I pretty much smiling and showing, flexing off of my power. This is where one of the other gods in my group chat, pretty much the god of boredom, comes right behind me and pretty much taps on my shoulder saying, Keyshawn, are you sure about this? I mean, I don't really care at all, but are you sure this is going to be a good idea? Which I pretty much smile at him and says, of course it's a good idea. Trust me. As long as I, play my cards right, we should have a whole audience. Which I pretty much look at all the gods. And all the gods pretty much smile and stuff. And pretty much half of them start laughing, saying, this should be amusing to see what this human show will do. Now, this is us. This is where I pretty much says, alright, gods, well, I need all your powers. I mean, everybody power. I mean, y'all put in pretty much half a percentage of your power, like 1% of your power. Which pretty much this is where all the gods give me all their power, and we pretty much make it into an orb. Now, this is where pretty much I turn the orb into an apple, and pretty much I say, well, we're just gonna have to wait. Which, this is where we wait for another millennium, and this is where Deku was born. Now, Deku will be born as the same with no quirk and stuff, and pretty much get bullied the same, but a little bit more worse than usual canon, and pretty much he gets more beat up and stuff. This is where Deku is pretty much walking home, pretty much injured and beat up and stuff, and pretty much this is where he is going to his house, which I look while I'm sitting on a cloud and saying, he looks like the perfect one. But I should probably be more concerned if the gods will intervene and try to help him out and try to have him on his side, have them on their side. Because if I do make Deku a new god, which I'm thinking, the gods are pretty much going to fight over him and trying to bring him on which side, which basically a North, Greek, or religion. Probably each god is going to fight over him and try to have him on their side. But let's just see. Which I pretty much is smiling. Now, this is where we do a skip, and pretty much everything happens the same at the school. Deku book get burned, and pretty much that's all of that. Now, this is where he takes a shortcut, and the sludge villain happens again, and things happen the same. Basically, All Might said you can't be a hero with a quirk, and all that. But this is where the butterfly effect kicks in. This is where, as Deku sees Bakugo screaming out for help, this is where Deku goes in to try to save Bakugo. But this is where Bakugo accidentally freaks out and pretty much explodes Deku away, creating a big explosion. And this big explosion hit Deku in the process, pretty much sending him flying a couple of meters away, pretty much burning half of his skin and stuff and face off. Pretty much, yeah. This is where Deku gets sent flying, and this is where the paramedics are coming in, and All Might comes in, but just in a late time to save Deku. Now, this is where Deku's in the hospital, barely breathing and stuff, and this is where pretty much Deku is like pretty much in a coma, you could say. Now, this is where I pretty much take Deku body and take him to a place, and this is where he wakes up in the garden. And no, it's not the Garden of Eden. How much I want to think. This is not the Garden of Eden, but pretty much a different garden. My garden. This is where Deku is looking around, and he pretty much sees that he looks up in the sky. It's a galaxy, sky, stars, little planets. Well, planets, stars, black hole, a beautiful black hole. This is where he basically sees an animal, and this animal is basically shifting into many things. This is based on my Galaxy Tail Beast, the Infinite Tail Beast, but pretty much it's transforming itself in many creatures and stuff. Even when it passes by a rock, it turns into a rat, many other things, and this is where my Tail Beast begins to start talking to Deku, and saying, look like you're awake, which Deku freaks out and says, who are you? Which this is where I appear in, and I pretty much say, oh, look like you're awake, which this is where Deku is trying to figure out where the hell he's at, and he asks where is he at, which I pretty much say, well, first you're at my garden, and second of all, have a seat. We're gonna have a talk, which pretty much I help Deku up because his body is frail and stuff and pretty much broken up, and I pretty much have him have a seat, make him some tea. I pretty much start talking to Deku. This is where I explain to Deku that he will become a new god of the old age of gods, which Deku says, a god, which this is where I smile and says, yeah, I'm basically a god. Create life, do me things, do helpful, all this stuff, like a god. Which, this is where Deku asks me, what is this exchange? Which, Deku is smart. He's not dumb. He asks me what is the cost of this, which I pretty much smile and says, well, nothing really. You just become a god. You'll have many proper abilities. You will have, your body will be altered. Pretty much, yeah. You just become a god. Will you take this or not? Which, this is where Deku starts to contemplate and think. And this is where I pretty much tell him, I pretty much start, influencing him a little bit, saying, Deku, ain't you getting tired of getting bullied? Not having a quirk? Constantly getting beat every day? Ain't you tired of seeing your mom show a fake smile to you? Hoping that you would just give up on your dream? Which, pretty much, we all know that Inko wouldn't do that, but I'm influencing him, you could say. Which, he pretty much is looking down and start crying. This is where I pretty much said, listen, I'm sorry about saying that about your mom is not really caring for you to become a hero. She really does care, but don't you think it's time to pretty much get an upgrade and become something more so your mother can be proud and you can be following your dreams and stuff, or become something more? Which Deku begins to start looking up with his half burnt face and half hair and stuff, and pretty much broken body. And he begins to start crying, looking at me. This is where I pretty much gives him the apple that has all the god's powers and stuff, like basically. And this is where he pretty much takes the apple. I pretty much tells him this, but know this, Deku. Great power, which I pretty much start laughing, saying, I'm joking. I'm not going to tell you the great power, great responsibilities. Do whatever you want. Go crazy. Which, this is where Deku eats the apple. Now, after Deku eats the apple, this is where he wakes up from the hospital. And as he wakes up from the hospital, his eyes is unique, different. As his eyes are like unique with stars in it, and his hair is much longer, and you could say looking beautiful. You could say this is where Deku begins to get up, and he begins to. He doesn't feel anything different, but when the nurse comes in to check up on Deku, Deku looks different. He looks, how can I say, he looks absolutely fucking scrumptious. No homo. That's how I have to explain it to y'all guys. He looks beautiful, like absolutely god tier beautiful. That like all the girls will be dropping wet and taking off their panties for him. That's how he's, you could say, hotter than the sun, you could say. But pretty much this is where the nurse drops her bin, and Deku's looking pretty much looking out the window, and she pretty much, makes a soft noise, which pretty much Deku turns around and says, huh? Which, as Deku turns around, he pretty much has the whole ripped body, you could say. Like a ripped body. And she's pretty much like saying, oh my god, which this is where they call the doctor, and the doctor pretty much starts checking up on Deku and seeing if he's alright, and he's perfectly fine. Like, the scars are gone, everything is gone. This is where Deku started thinking that maybe that dream was just, a dream, and his quirk activated, which that's what he's thinking. And this is where, the doctors, lets Inko know that Deku is pretty much is awake, and she pretty much goes and she immediately knows the difference of Deku. Like, she senses an aura of something higher than just a normal person, like a higher being, you could say. This is where she sees Deku's different features and stuff, and how ripped he is and stuff, and she pretty much puts that out thought and just runs and hugs him and asks if he's okay. This is where Deku is still, out of thought and placing and spacing out, and this is where he says, yeah, he's okay, but he's still a little bit spaced out because, like I said, the power is still flowing in him more. But pretty much, this is where Inko takes Deku home, and this is where Deku is just in his room, resting for a bit, and as he's laying in the bed, this is where he starts, listening, remember listening of what I said to him, saying that he will basically become a new god. He can do whatever he wants, create life, kill life, destroy planets, basically all that shit. And he has a lot of power. This is where Deku starts putting up his hand to the wall, and he begins to start creating something. This is where he creates a baby mouse, but this baby mouse looks different. This baby mouse has a horn, has two antlers, and pretty much going around Deku's hand, which Deku is saying, so he wasn't lying. I am a new god, which, as Deku's thinking about it, this is where pretty much he hears a knock on the door and starts heading downstairs. This is where Deku mom, Inko, opened up the door, and this is where Bakugo and Bakugo's mom comes in and pretty much says hello, and this is where Bakugo's mom says to say it, which Bakugo at first reluctantly starts saying, no, I'm not going to apologize because that idiot wanted to try and save my life, which Bakugo's getting negative about it, which this is what Deku gets a little bit, like, Deku looks at him, but not anger and stuff, because Deku's pretty much not afraid anymore. His whole body and mindset has changed. So instead of being like a non-intelligent, no, Deku is like very intelligent. Like, he's up to intelligent that he's like 1,000 steps ahead of everybody. Like, he knows what everybody's gonna do. He can predict what everybody can do. He basically knows what's gonna happen next, and he knows how he can get the reactions out of people and stuff. So pretty much Deku is just looking at him, just quiet, which Bakugo mom trying to make him apologize, which Deku pretty much tells her that it's no point, he's not going to apologize, and pretty much he just tells him to come in. This is where Deku says he's going to cook a meal for everybody, which they're all sitting on a couch, and Bakugo's mom is, still apologizing for Bakugo, which Deku tells her that it's okay. You don't have to apologize. Like I said, if anyone's going to have to apologize, it's going to be him. Which this is where Bakugo says he's not apologizing for shit. And Deku pretty much just doesn't, like, Deku pretty much just doesn't, like, react in anger or manner or anything. He doesn't care, but at the same time, he does. But he's not going to, like, show this. Because basically, he knows he's a god. But pretty much, this is where Deku pretty much done cooking. And this is where he brings out the plate. And it's like a good-ass, glorious food. Like, this food's looking smacking. Like, finger licking good. That's how I'm going to explain it. But pretty much, this is where Deku makes the meal. And Bakugo's mom is pretty much, surprised that Deku knows how to cook. And Inko's surprised, too, asking Deku how did he know how to cook. Which, pretty much, this is where Deku explains to his mom that, I don't know, ever since he was in a coma, he woke up, he has this different stuff now. Which Inko says, oh, which this is where she's feeling concerned, which Deku says, it's nothing for you to be concerned about, Mom. I'm not really, like, different or, crazy or anything, which pretty much she smiles and says, oh, okay, and, pretty much out that. This is where Deku pretty much looks at Bakugo, and pretty much he does a little smirk smile, which Bakugo sees it a little bit, which this is where Bakugo's getting pissed off. But this is where Deku goes to Bakugo's mom and pretty much, apologizes for, what he says earlier. And she's pretty much, blushing because Deku, like I said, is looking hot. And she pretty much says, no, it's okay. Which this is where Deku, takes her hand and pretty much kisses it, pretty much showing, his flirting side to her. Which she's blushing a little bit. And she's saying, oh, Deku, stop. Which Deku's saying, sorry. My bad, I coughed. But pretty much, yeah, she's pretty much saying, oh, stop, Deku. Which this is where Deku's saying, I'm sorry, but you just have the most beautifulness. Which this is a part of Deku revenge, a little bit, you could say. And I know what y'all guys thinking, wait, gods don't do revenge? Listen, gods are just like human, but just higher with power. I'm just going to say this, alright, guys? Gods are just like humans, just with higher power, okay? Because if we do our books research, Zeus, cheating, and humans do that too, and jealous, basically, yeah, y'all get what I'm saying. But pretty much, this is where Deku is, showing off his first side, and Bakugo can see it, and he gets pissed off. And Deku is, not minding Bakugo at all because, like I said, Deku knows what he is now. And pretty much, he starts flirting with Bakugo's mom, which Inko stops it a little bit, which Deku says, oh, sorry, Mom. And pretty much, they all sit down to eat. Now, after that, this is where Bakugo goes home first because he says he's not dealing with this shit. And this is where Deku says he's going to walk Bakugo's mom home, which Inko says okay. Now, this is where Deku says he's going to be out a little bit later. So, he tells his mom not to worry, which she says okay. Now, this is where Deku's walking with Bakugo's mom, and they're having a conversation and stuff. And this is where Bakugo's mom is, basically explaining that she's very sorry and she has guilt for what has happened, which Deku takes her hand and pretty much looks at her with the unique eyes, and pretty much it says that it's not really her fault. It was his choice. He wanted to save his best friend, and basically explains all that, which this is where Deku makes his move on her. Now, what do I mean by making his move on her? Well, I'll basically explain. This is where Deku basically grabs her, and pretty much just kisses her. And he's going, he's doing the spicy kissing, like the French kissing, hands down, tongue on tongue action. It's spicy. It's high, you could say. Now, this is where pretty much she's basically saying we can't, which this is where Deku says we can. And if you want to blame anyone, don't blame yourself, blame me, which this is where they head back to Bakugo's house. Now, pretty much this is where Deku heads into bed with Bakugo's mom, and they start having some head on action, you could say. He's rocking the bed with her. He's going pretty hard on there. Now, pretty much Bakugo can hear this and pretty much trying to figure out what the hell is that noise. This is where he's about to go see until Deku finishes business, and he basically gives her a kiss on the lips and pretty much disappears. Pretty much teleporting back in his house. Now, after he teleports his house, this is where pretty much Bakugo opens up his mom's door and asks what the hell was that noise, which pretty much she says, oh, it was nothing. Which pretty much this is what she's thinking. She's thinking about how Deku absolutely dominated her and doggy styled the shit out of her, which I'm gonna just tell y'all that. And pretty much, yeah. But Bakugo says what the hell ever and goes in his room. Now this is where Deku pretty much is in his bed, pretty much smiling at the revenge he pretty much did. And pretty much he doesn't feel bad. He feels a tiny bit bad, but that's like tiny bit guilt. But he doesn't give a damn about it. He said it's justified for all the times Bakugo did. Now the next day, this is the 2 months now. This is where Bakugo is getting training with All Might. Getting training with All Might at the beach. Bakugo, yeah. So Bakugo became the successor. I'm just gonna make that happen just for spicy reasons. Now, this is where Deku is at the beach too. Pretty much, he begins to do workouts, and he's pretty much doing them very fast. Like, he does 1,000. He does like 1,000,000 push-ups, 1,000 sit-ups. He's basically doing all of it, and it's not a sweat to him. He's not sweating at all. This is where Deku says, I really don't need to train, which he's thinking about it right now because he's thinking about going to the UA High exams and trying to get to Class 1A. Now, this is where Deku sees Bakugo and All Might, which Deku pretty much waves at All Might and Bakugo, which this is where they see Deku, and All Might sees Deku, and he says, wait, I know you, you're that kid, which pretty much All Might looks down and feels guilt, which Deku can see emotions and stuff, and he pretty much saying, hey, All Might, and no. And All Might, what's with the down face? Are you feeling guilty for what happened? Which, pretty much, this is where, hold on. Sorry about that. Let's continue. But pretty much this is where All Might is, looking down and not saying anything. Which Deku pretty much comes up to All Might. Which Deku has a ponytail, which he wrapped his long hair around with a ponytail, and pretty much taps All Might's shoulder, and pretty much tells him that it's okay, like it's not your fault. Which Deku pretty much telling him the truth, and pretty much explaining to All Might that his weakness that he has, that he couldn't transform, it's not his fault. It was just at the bad time and bad place that he couldn't do it. Which All Might is still feeling down. Which this is where Deku heals up All Might wound and pretty much tells All Might to always to stay strong and look his head up. You might have failed to protect. You might have failed to save me, but you saved my friend. So, which this is where Deku pretty much smiles at All Might, which All Might begins to start crying because Deku words can't really, you could say, because he has all power. He has every power of each different god, as gods that y'all know, Wukong, like Budokai, all that. Jesus with words, basically all that. You could say all the power of gods and all that, and demigods. This is where Bakugo gets a little bit pissed off. Well, gets a little bit, looking a little bit down a little bit. But this is where Deku pretty much asked him, well, what they was doing here. Which pretty much this is where All Might saying that he's training his successor. Which this is where Deku says, oh, cool. Which this is where Deku looks at Bakugo and says, well, hope y'all continue training. I'm just gonna do my training. Which All Might says that they should be sparring sometimes if they want. Which Deku says he would glad to, and Deku pretty much walks away. But what All Might doesn't know, when Deku healed his wound, he pretty much took All Might power. So he can pretty much take powers. And pretty much Deku now has one for all. And pretty much he can use it at its full content without having any casualties or anything. But this is where Deku pretty much tries out All Might's ability, and he pretty much realized that this quirk also have other abilities with it, like the whip and all that. Basically, the successor abilities too. But this is where he's pretty much saying, interesting. And this is where he begins to start creating human life. And because he doesn't want to like test out all his powers by himself, so he pretty much create like two beings, which one is a female and one is a male. And if you're thinking like, oh, is this like the revelations of like Adam and Eve? No, it's a whole different case. But pretty much, it's not creation of man, but you could say. But I know y'all gonna get those vibes in the comments. But pretty much, this is where he creates them, and he creates another person, and it's a kid. Well, yeah, he creates another person. Well, no, he just creates two, a female and male, and pretty much they're creating and they're looking around, and they look at Deku as the creator because they can feel the connection. This is where Deku pretty much creates them some clothes and help and you know have them put it on and stuff. And this is where he pretty much starts training with them. Well, pretty much training with them and stuff and testing out his abilities. This is where the people he created them with the same abilities that he have, but like in a lower content. So it's not absolutely like, oh, they're busted like Deku. They're just the same like Deku with the same abilities, just a lower ground version. So it's a limit of how much they can take it. Kind of like think of like Adam in Ragnarok, of how his divine power has a certain content with his limits of his body, of how long he can hold it. Yeah, it's kind of like that. So pretty much, and he pretty much has the duration up to 200. They're really 200, so they can use their power up to 200 until it depletes and they have to recharge. But pretty much, this is where Deku is training with them, testing out his ability stuff. He starts seeing them use lightning, which he starts testing out his lightning, which he pretty much tests out his lightning, starts testing out other abilities. He also knows that he can raise the dead or bring back the dead completely back to life. As he start bringing fish and other sea animals that like was dead on the beach back to life. He also can bring branches back to its fully state. He can rewind time. He's basically learning a lot of stuff over the months. Now, this is where Deku begins to um, come back to meet up with All Might and Bakugo on the final training. And this is where his creations are also following him because they have nowhere else to stay in pretty much. And he pretty much keeps them in his room. Well, yeah, keep them in his room because there's nowhere else to pretty much go. And this is where, as he's coming to the beach, this is where All Might says, "Oh, who's these two?" Which pretty much Deku didn't really give him a name at the time. But this is where he pretty much named when he pretty much just thought about it and he said he pretty much just named them out of numbers. Uh, 12, 12 and 6. And no, it's not because of that 6. It's a different 6, but just the number 6. But pretty much, well, 12 and well, no, yeah, 12 and 6, you could say. Now, this is where all might say, well, those are weird names, which Deku says, yeah, and they pretty much smile because they finally got a name from the creator, and they're excited about it, which Bakugo can see their happiness, and also All Might, which they think it's weird, but they continue going. This is where Deku begins to start fighting with Bakugo, and Bakugo pretty much starts creating explosions and merging his quirk together with his quirk with his one for all quirk. So yeah, this is where all my Deku starts fighting with sparring with Bakugo, and Bakugo is trying to hit Deku hard. And this is where Deku is pretty much dodging his attacks and stuff. Like he can see the attacks and perceive them. This is where Bakugo throws an explosion right at Deku, and Deku pretty much does the same thing. He does the same counter and throws the explosion back, but much more powerful. Which All Might is shocked, and Bakugo is shocked that Deku has his quirk. Which this is where Bakugo asks, how the hell does he have his quirk Which this is where Deku begins to start saying, I don't know, Bakugo. Why do I have your quirk? Which this is where All Might starts being concerned because he's starting to think that, off one, uh, off one has a son, and Deku might be the son. But this is where he just, contemplating on that to see if it really is true. But this is where he's thinking, like, no, it's not his son because his son, if he was the son of that guy, of the villain, that means he would have took away my quirk and Bakugo, took away Bakugo's quirk, and Bakugo wouldn't be able to use his quirk right now. That's what All Might's thinking. Now, this is where Bakugo's throwing more explosions and pretty much thinking of what he can do, but Deku can just see all his attack movements before it happens, and he's pretty much just standing there just looking at him, and pretty much Deku tells him to just give up. He's not going to win this switch. This is where Bakugo tells him to shut the hell up, and this is where Bakugo merged the quirk and does the finger flick with the explosion to create a massive explosion, which All Might's about trying to stop Bakugo until Deku just pretty much does the same thing and creates a bigger explosion back at Bakugo, which it hits him and sends him flying, and pretty much injuring Bakugo. This is where Bakugo is hardly can't stand up and injured and stuff. This is where All Might's about to stop the fight until Deku starts walking to Bakugo. And pretty much Bakugo is trying to throw another explosion until Deku just basically just taps his forehead and knocks him out. And pretty much just heals up his wound and saying that that was a good fight. He tried his best. And pretty much, heals up Bakugo's clothes and, which All Might is shocked that Deku can do this. This is where All Might asks what Deku quirk is, which Deku tells him that this is where Deku pretty much gets up and says that he doesn't have a quirk and basically he's just a higher being than everything. Well, he just has a higher power than everyone around here. And he begins to just go home and tells All Might that he will see him later. Because Deku can also see the future, so he can see all predicaments and what outcomes he can do. Or he can either alter the future if he wants to, or alter the past. He can honestly make Bakugo unexist if he wants to. Which maybe he did, maybe he not, but let's just find out. But pretty much let's just continue. Now, pretty much this is where Deku heads home, and pretty much 12 and 6 is right behind him, and he's pretty much looking at them, and he hears their stomach growling, which they do talk to one another, and also talk to Deku, but they don't ask Deku can they get food and stuff because Deku is their creator. This is where Deku pretty much says all right, and pretty much he can pretty much can tell they're hungry. He says all right, and he pretty much takes them to the food thing. Now this is where they're pretty much eating food and stuff, and this is where 6 she pretty much asks the creator that what are their purpose, which Deku is thinking about that and saying, well, y'all purpose was basically just to test out the power of how much power I have, but y'all can do what y'all want. Y'all can live your own house, do your own lives. Y'all can basically do what y'all want, which pretty much they're thinking about it and saying, so basically we've been created to test out your power, but we can also do what we want now, which Deku says, yeah, go ahead. Go in country, do whatever you want. Live your life. See the world if you want to. Try new things if you want to. Which they pretty much begin to start smiling, and they pretty much hugs Deku saying thank you. And they pretty much say that they will make sure to come see their creator every now and then, which Deku says, okay, and they pretty much starts heading off. And they start holding hands. Which Deku says, look like they have a relationship with each other. I didn't expect that to happen. Which pretty much he says, oh well, and he just starts heading home. Now, next day, this is where the interest is happening. Deku's pretty much just creates a cloud and hops on it, and he pretty much starts just letting the cloud take him there. And he's pretty much yawning, saying, which as he's doing that, this is where a couple animals nearby sees Deku, and this is where Deku stops and pretty much sees the animals, and he begins to start feeding the animals and stuff and all that. This is where a couple other animals like bears and deer start coming to Deku, and Deku is has that flowing nature and power and stuff. Like I said, like Mother Nature, like all those powers. Like yeah, pretty much he has that. This is where animals were like around him, like birds flying on his shoulder, squirrel on his shoulder, on his other shoulder, basically like a snake is basically on his lap. This is like a lot of animals and stuff, like also bugs and stuff, like a spider, which he's not afraid of them or anything. This is where he's pretty much like on a cloud and sitting when the animals are on him, which some people notice Deku has animals walking right behind him and stuff and all that crap. But this is where he makes it at the entrance exam, and this is where as he's getting up, this is where he almost like typically almost fall. This is where the deer pretty much like save like catches Deku, which Deku pets the deer saying thank you friend, and pretty much they start all heading on their own and stuff, which Deku pretty much gives them some more food and tells them to be safe out there, and they start going. Now this is where Deku hits in the interest, and many students have saw Deku with animals and shit, which they're guessing. They're trying to say, what is his quirk? Is his quirk animal nature manipulation? Like they're trying to figure out what's his quirk, because they see him flying on a like coming on with a clown with animals around him and walking right behind him and stuff, and he has this flowing nature power, like flowing aura. They don't know what quirk he has, which they're all guessing and gossiping and whispering, saying, "Who is this kid? Like, what's his quirk?" They're trying to know what the hell is he. But pretty much this is where Deku takes his seat and he sits right beside Bakugo, which Bakugo looks at Deku with a little bit of anger, which Deku can tell why is he angry, because pretty much he found out two things. That one, Bakugo, one, that he got beat by Deku, and two, Deku healed him up. And maybe possibly three, that he found out that Deku had some fornication with his mom. But other than that, let's continue. Pretty much, this is where sorry about that. Let's continue. This is where Deku is pretty much doing everything, and he pretty much just passes everything with 100%, including the test thing with the college university. Basically, he passed everything. He's the top of the top. Now, this is where the robot test begins. And Deku pretty much can see the outcome of what he does, and he pretty much saying, well, I guess I'm just gonna hurry up and just destroy that 0 point robot before she gets stuck. Which he's talking about Uraraka. So, because he really doesn't want to have an encounter with her. He just doesn't. But pretty much this is where the teacher says, on your mark, set, go. And Deku begins to start just walking. Well, yeah, starts walking very slowly. And this is where everybody's running right behind him. And this is where the teachers are looking at Deku, and they're pretty much saying, why is he just walking? Like, what's he doing? Which, this is where, as Deku's walking, this is where they see Deku's like kind of moving very fastly, which they're saying he's moving quite fast. Like it's almost like he's running, but he's walking at the same time. This is where, as he's walking, robots are just getting destroyed left and right as he passed by them. Which, as he's walking towards them or passing by them, which they're saying, is that his quirk? What's his quirk? Magnetism? Like they're trying to figure out. The teachers are giving him points, but they're trying to figure out what's his quirk. Which All Might is thinking that could he be a god, or like have like all for one's like power, because he's trying to figure out if Deku is the son of all for ones. Which this is as Deku's going, he's destroying robots left and right. This is where Deku pretty much saying, I think I'm done here. Which this is where Deku says, oh yeah, I forgot about the 0 point robot. Which Uraraka is about to scream for help until Deku pretty much just shoots at the 0 point robot. Yeah. This is where Deku basically shoots a little bit of electric bolt at. He turns his hand into makes his hand into like a finger gun, and he says bang, and he pretty much shoots electric bolt at the Zero robot, pretty much blowing it up, and pretty much shutting it down. Which this is where Deku pretty much is about to walk away until he just says, and pretty much just goes to Uraraka and lifts up the robot and asks if she's okay. But she's saying yeah. And this is where he heals up her leg and says, well, I'll be going now, which she's about to try to ask for his name, which this is where he doesn't want to answer it, but he pretty much just tells her that his name is Deku, and pretty much he goes off. Now, after that, this is where the nurse pretty much go check up on Uraraka to see if she's okay, and realize that her leg is completely healed, like no fractures, no nothing. Which she's saying, who has this power to heal your wound? Which she pretty much points at Deku, and Deku is pretty much just walking away. Which everybody's trying to figure out what's his quirk, if he can do all that. Which All Might is still thinking of who's this kid is and who's his father. Now, after that, this is where Deku pretty much heads home, and Inko pretty much goes up to Deku and smacks him on the face, saying, "How dare him?" Which Deku looks at her and says, "What did I do wrong?" Which pretty much this is where she starts crying a little bit and says, how dare you, get someone pregnant?" Which this is where Deku says, "Oh, you're talking about her?" Which she pretty much says, "Yes, my friend." Which this is where Deku says that he apologized for that, but it was a simple means for revenge. But this is where she basically yells at him, saying, "So you just did it out of revenge?" Which Deku says, "No." Which he doesn't want his mom to really be angry at him and just get it over with. He pretty much just says that he had affection for her ever since when he was young, and pretty much he goes upstairs saying that if you want to continue being mad at me, then be mad at me. But I did what I did. Which this is where he pretty much heads in his room. Now, this is where Deku is laying in his bed, and he's pretty much saying, "Should I just go back in time and stop myself?" Which he's thinking about it, but he says, "Nah, it'd be fine." Now, the next day, Deku pretty much gets in. Well, opens up the door, and he pretty much look at his mail, seeing that he passed and he reached first, pretty much being All Might score. But this is where he also sees Bakugo's mom grabbing the mail, and he pretty much waves at her, which she pretty much blushes and waves back, and pretty much heads back inside. Which, as that's happening, this is where Inko says good morning to Deku, which Deku says good morning, and she pretty much says that let's have a talk, which Deku pretty much sits down and have a talk with her. This is where she's pretty much saying that he's going to pretty much be a father, which Deku looks at her and says, "A father?" Which, he does a little surprising, has a surprising face, where she's saying, yes, he's going to be a father because he got her pregnant, which Deku says, okay, yeah, I take responsibility. Which she pretty much saying, how you going to say that? Which Deku says, well, like I said, I'm take responsibility for my actions. Which she says, you're still young. Which Deku says, okay, I'm young, but I can be a young father who can take care of a child. And pretty much he just walks outside, pretty much heading out, saying that he's heading out. This is where Inko's trying to yell at him and tell him that he's not ready yet. Which Deku's saying, yeah, and he starts heading off. This is where, as Deku's heading off, he pretty much just starts heading to the video game place, and he begins to start just playing video games and pretty much reaching the highest score, beating everything. And people are saying, who is this kid? As he's pretty much leaving, this is where Shigaraki, uh, yeah, Shigaraki comes in, and he pretty much stops him and saying, "You pretty skilled at video games," which pretty much Deku can see the whole backstory and to see his past and stuff. It says, let me guess, you're trying to recruit me for something, which pretty much Shigaraki says, you can see right through me, which this is where Deku says, yeah. Anyways, shall we get going to the headquarters then? Which Shigaraki says, you're smarter than I thought. Okay. Now this is where Deku heads with Shigaraki to the headquarters, and when he heads into the headquarters, this is where Awful One is there, and he's pretty much saying that he has a new recruit, which Awful One says, who might you be? Which Deku looks at him and pretty much says, I'm the one who's going to kill you. Which he says, what? And pretty much Deku snaps his finger, pretty much erasing him. Now, this is where Shigaraki looks at Deku, and Deku begins to start snapping his finger again, and he starts erasing all the no moves and stuff. and all of that. And pretty much he starts killing off like half of the villains that's supposed to be a threat. And as he kills all of them, he pretty much is smiling, and Shigaraki doesn't know what to do. This is where Shigaraki is about to touch Deku to try to like decay him, which as he touched Deku, this is where he starts to decay, saying, "What the? Why is this happening?" Which this is where Deku starts looking at him and smiling, saying, "Oh, you thought your quirk would work on me? I'm a god." Which Deku pretty much starts explaining to him, saying, "I knew you work for a powerful villain. I know you work for awful one. I just wanted you to show you your own eyes that he's not he's not all that, and I'm a bigger threat." Which pretty much Shigaraki getting scared. This is where Deku stops Shigaraki from completely decaying and dying off, and he pretty much restores Shigaraki back to health. This is where Deku pretty much slams Shigaraki to the ground and pretty much tells him this, saying, "You work for me, and also go to him." Which Shigaraki saying, "Who? All Might, and show him your true identity." Which this is where Shigaraki saying, "What do you mean?" Which this is where Deku begins to lift him up and choke him and says, Your mother, your mother, she loved you dearly and she wanted you to become something great. Now fix this mistake and do something right and go talk to him." Which this is where Deku says, "And if you don't, I'm going to erase you. Erase everything that you ever hold dear to you." Which Shigaraki is thinking about the person that's dear to him, and he pretty much begins to freak out. Now this is where Deku lets him go. It tells him to go fix his shit up, and he starts heading out. This is where half of the villains are also like, shocked, and Deku tells him to fix their shit too, or he's gonna kill him, and he pretty much walks off. Now as he walks off, this is where he pretty much heads back home, and Inkles is not there. Pretty much left a note saying that she's going to get groceries, which Deku pretty much does a sigh and says, and pretty much he heads in his room and lays in bed. Now, this is part one of What If Deku Was a New God. If you like, live, like, do all that stuff. But Kishan Chia, thanks for watching, and peace out. Also, 40 likes. But peace.
It looks like you lost another one.